Hi, I'm event technologist Graham Smith here at ISE 2022, catching up with Amelia Kallman, futurist, author, artist, speaker, podcast host, amongst many, many other things. We're going to sit down to chat over NFTs, Metaverse in events, and upcoming AR revolution, possibly. Okay, let's get into it. So first off, Amelia, thanks so much for sitting down with me. I know your schedule is absolutely jam-packed, as well as hosting the Smart Workplace Summit yesterday. I know you've got a lot on today, so I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. I always have time for you, Graham.
I was just thinking this morning, when I first met you the first time, you were wearing an Ethereum t-shirt. I don't know whether you remember. How far do you think it's come? What changes have you seen in the last 5 years?
Well, I think you would still be one of the only people who knew that was Ethereum on my t-shirt. It really impressed me. And I've been to many conferences wearing it, and it still doesn't get the kind of attention I think it deserves. It's a great t-shirt. It's made by my friend Sylvia Heisel, who's a fashion designer in the tech world and stuff, and she's amazing. I mean, I think it's come a long ways, but it obviously has a lot further to go. I mean, for me, my biggest problem with crypto is the footprint. So, we have to move from proof of work to proof of stake for it to be sustainable, in my opinion. So I think there's been some resistance about the masses joining the kind of crypto revolution, partly because of that. And I know that for me, it's a big factor, and it's always something that I'm looking at. But hopefully things start to get better. I don't think Bitcoin's going to change. I think Bitcoin's going to stay the same.
No, I think Ethereum they're trying to switch it over to proof of work. Bitcoin, I think, has to kind of stay on proof of stake because to change. So just to rewind a little bit, the proof of work is when the blocks are verified. You have
it's the ledger, yeah.
Yeah, you have miners which take all the transactions that are coming in, agree what's fair, make sure nothing fraudulent is happening, and it's like my best analogy for it is if you go out to a restaurant with a load of friends and you all order vastly different things, so you have to try and figure out who owes what at the end of it. It's a bit like having a few people volunteer who are maths whizzes and going, okay, well, I've got £5 for the first person that figures it all out, and they sit down and do it all, but they're so quick that they're all going to do it about the same time. And so they have to solve a really complicated question, or a bit like the numbers round on Countdown. So they figure out who owes what, do this thing, and then the fastest person to figure out the sum gets the money. They get given a Bitcoin. The problem with this, and the reason that it's resulted in a high amount of energy used, is because it's been an arms race. It's been a computational arms race. It's like me, going back to the analogy, it's like me getting in Carol Vorderman or Rachel Riley on my team to try and figure it out. People are buying graphics cards to figure out that, to be the first to figure out that complicated maths question. I think it's something along the lines of figuring out every prime number from 1 till 328,000. There isn't a quick way of doing it apart from going through each number one by one. So the more graphics power, the more computational power you've got behind it, the faster you can do that, which means the more likely you are to become the one that gets awarded the Bitcoin in the mining case. Proof of stake is different. That works by, that's a bit more like a raffle. So that same situation where you're sat at a dinner table, if each person buys a raffle ticket, some can buy more than others. So it's like you get 5, Sanj gets 2, I get 1, and then you draw a raffle to figure out who is going to be the one that gets the money for figuring out what that total bill is. So you're doing the same. You're computationally, you're figuring out the same thing. You're figuring out those transactions, but then the award system is different.
See, that's why I love talking to you, Graham. It's because you have a good way of explaining things. I had kind of, I don't know, I guess simplified it to this idea that the proof of work actually carries around, this work and this contract from its legacy, like its life, and that every time it's sold and passed on, you're just adding to this larger ledger, whereas the kind of proof of stake is kind of like the highlights, like the headline, and it comes with that legacy, but all you need is that kind of the top level of what it's amounted to. I don't know if that explains it any better either. I mean, it's one of those tough things. That's part of the hard thing about it, is wrapping your head around it and how to explain it, you know?
No one said cryptography was easy.
I love that word, cryptography. Yeah. It's good.
So in the last couple of weeks, there's been headlines around NFTs, the market falling, crashing. I know every other market is crashing right now, and so that's been a bit of a defense of it. But the transaction volume on sources like OpenSea and Rarible have reduced. Have you got any opinions on that?
Yeah, so I mean, with NFTs, I think there was this kind of false inflation around the art market. Because essentially, you know, there was this whole like race to buy a centimeter round, you know, profile picture for your Twitter account, you know, where you can you can also just take a free photo or, you know, mock something up. So I think there is a bit of a bubble around that. But to me, where NFTs get really interesting is in utility NFTs. So like what they do, how they impact the real world in your real life. So for instance, I'm involved with a new one that is coming out, and yes, it uses blockchain and it uses NFT technology, but what's really exciting about it for me is the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization. Yes. So, you know, what we can then do to it. So essentially, you know, we're buying a stake. I think of it, this project that is called Magnificent Misfits, and it has to do.
Great name.
Thank you. Yeah. It's not, I didn't come up with it. There's a genius, my friend Don John's behind it. So, and it has to do with the Chelsea Hotel where I used to live. And maybe I shouldn't be talking about it yet, but, what's exciting to me about it is I'm explaining it to people like it's almost like a digital members club, and we have the opportunity to create this this living digital monument to the legacy of this place and these people. And as participants, we then are creating our own economy and our own market. And there's 3 different wallets to be had. There's personal wallets, and then there's a group wallet, and then there's one specifically to give back to the project. But as a group, we can start, you know, giving back to people and projects that support, you know, this cause to maintain this legacy around something that we all love. And also, you know, there's hosting events. I mean, the thing is I think we've only just scratched the surface of what is possible. And I really resisted NFTs for a long time, again, because of the footprint. But there's also because it moves us back into ownership economy, which kind of just like gets me a bit, because we've just gone through this whole time of like entering a shared economy, and everyone's talking about that, you know, and where we don't have to own things anymore. But this very much goes back to ownership.
You're an artist in your own right. You've had your work exhibited in galleries. So up until this point, you'd never been involved, never been tempted to put your work in as an NFT?
Yeah, no, it's something I've been playing around with, and I will end up doing it, I'm sure. But I don't know how much joy you get out of it, you know? Like I was at Paris NFT Day and Paris Blockchain Week a couple weeks ago, and it kind of feels to me at the moment a bit cold, you know, and it's all about, you know,
delivering everything through a screen as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And when I had a day off and I went to the art museums, and I literally burst into tears several times, you know, moved by seeing this piece of art in front of me that's been in history books that, you know, that somebody actually painted and worked on, and, you know, and I don't get that from the art of the NFTs. So I'm interested in how like musicians are able to use it to cut out the middleman and potentially fund projects. I think there's lots of opportunities coming.
The NFT that you were talking about, that you're finally involved with, that seems to transcend the boundaries of what most people think of as an NFT, and that usually it's a picture of,
that's why I'm into it.
Of a monkey.
Yeah.
Whereas this is something more than that.
And that's what I think is people are still kind of having a hard time wrapping their brains around, is this utility aspect of it. Like, what can you give back that has meaning? Like, how can we create a new kind of community? You think about like Facebook groups, right? Mm-hmm. And so this DAO idea is like that in Web3, but we all have an ownership and a stake in it. And that gives us power to be able to do things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, or just as like a Facebook group.
But much harder to implement, right? That kind of NFT and interaction. What I'm seeing is, I recently minted an NFT for a client. So something was just a free giveaway, but it was a memento, a souvenir, an impermeable memory of an event. And I learned a lot about it. The biggest thing I learned is that if you're a creator, if you're an artist, there are very low stakes for, if you put something up on OpenSea, you don't actually have to pay any money. It's the buyer that's paying the money to mint it and to get it onto the blockchain. So it immediately gets my skepticism, because I can take a load of elements of an image. If I'm creating a cartoon character, different eyes, different faces, different body shapes, run that through a program that automatically generates 1,000 different permutations of that, or upload them to OpenSea, and then it's still at no cost. And then if somebody wants that, they're then paying for it to be minted and processed onto the blockchain. And I see that as, it's a little bit like, I'm not sure what's driving it. If you're driving it to be, if you're trying to get hold of this because of its scarcity, its value is only really coming from your perception of what you think other people will pay for it. It's people are buying these things. So
then you have the bots that are copying them, and you know, I mean, the whole idea behind blockchain is you're supposed to, and NFTs and stuff, is that you're supposed to be able to prove ownership, and then you're getting these artists waking up the next morning and a bot has copied and sold it 500 times. You know, and
the point behind blockchain is that you can verify it back to its original source, but then you still need someone like a human to verify who the original source is, don't you?
Right.
So you're still in this trustless system. You're still having to have a lot of trust in that and in the artists themselves.
Well, and then there's also the transparency, and so this has always been billed as like, you know, one of the benefits. But at the same time, do we really want everything we're looking at, everything we're buying on a blockchain ledger? You know, maybe there's things that I mean, also, do you want people to know how much money you're spending? These kind of things, like, to me, it's just a bit creepy.
Yeah. It's slightly ironic because the biggest critics of NFTs and the biggest advocates are both making the same mistake, in my opinion. So the people that are putting their entire life savings into the pictures of monkeys, and then on the other hand, you've got the people who are like, no, it's awful, it's the scourge of the earth, it's just capitalism wrapped in another form.
Well, I would agree with that, absolutely. I feel like I'm very much kind of middle of the road. I was very much on the, you know, this is a new kind of capitalism, and you know.
But it can be. But I think the thing is, this is not the final form. This is the minimum viable product of it. Blockchains are incredibly complicated, and complicated to interact with. So, but it doesn't really surprise me that the first manifestation of blockchains we're getting, the first public interaction with it, is on a very visual medium. It's storing pictures, it's transferring videos and things, and logging them in, minting them, and as NFTs. So you had the currency bit first, which people were like, okay, I kind of understand money. This is similar a little bit to some transaction systems, but then blockchains are capable of so much more. And so you've got an elementary smart contract of this is a bit of information, which is where something is stored, or it's an NFT is effectively a search query that talks to a server that tells you where something is stored, because nothing is actually really stored on the blockchain. Images themselves aren't stored, videos aren't stored, because of the cost of
right
minting. I read something like it cost about £30,000 to actually store the data of an average JPEG into the blockchain. So you're just storing like a little search query, but it's capable of a lot more. But you've got the ones that are putting the life savings into monkey pictures, thinking that they're getting in on the ground floor, and they're purchasing things because they'll think they'll be able to flip it in 3 months' time for 30 grand or 300 times profit. And the annoying thing is you have some case studies where that's happened, but then that's being sold as if this is guaranteed.
Right.
But it will evolve, and your example is great because it goes well beyond just the swapping pictures.
Yeah, I can't get excited about the NFTs as art at the moment. Maybe I will. My opinion. One of the things I love about being a futurist is my opinion always gets to change based on new information and insights, and my learning and research. And I was going to say some stats, and actually I just realized they're like a month old, but it was something like only 2%.
Which is a year in
I know,
terms,
exactly. Like less than 2% of people actually own NFTs, and that buying and selling an NFT is equivalent to buying, selling, and shipping a real piece of artwork something like 91 times. It's ridiculous.
And that's if you get it. There's been examples where people haven't put in enough money for the transaction and it's just stalled, and they've not got, when there's been a big release, they've ended up not actually getting anything from it.
But if that monkey picture is representative of something bigger, something that is transferable into the real world, or community, or there was on the last podcast episode I did for XR Star, I interviewed Anne from Wristband, and there was a really great example I used in the intro of a group that every month they vote on which new emerging singer-songwriter they want to fund. So they support these emerging artists, and they are able to do this by creating this kind of marketplace, and then they have a stake in this artist's career. And I love that that becomes a bit of a circular economy. I think that is interesting to me.
So question on that then, if it's a choice of say 5 artists or something, and it's a bit like that's a popularity contest to begin with, but then the more popular someone is, the more fans they've got, then each fan tells two of their friends, aren't you going to get a situation where the big just get bigger and bigger? You end up with this wedge effect?
Well, I think that's where scarcity comes in. So if there's like a cap on how much you can fund, or how many people can own the NFT, then I think that contains it to some degree, if that makes sense. It is kind of a hard thing to explain. I mean, one of
as long as you don't get into share trading or putting on market for half an NFT, which I think is becoming a thing now, which then makes it infinitely divisible, and so then it's not really scarce.
Right. Well, and then there's also, now there's a thing about not having to purchase NFTs. Like, for instance, I think Dua Lipa is giving away NFTs for people doing social media interaction around her new album and stuff. So it's becoming like a reward system for fans. And it can unlock other content, and I don't know.
Is there anything you've seen that would
I'd rather buy a record.
Yeah, it's interesting how they went completely out of fashion and are now back with a vengeance.
Yeah, I just got a record player, so I'm really excited about it. Inherited my parents' record collection. So.
I've been building up a list of vinyl I want to buy. I don't even own a record player.
It's cool. It's really, there is something really experiential about it. Like, when you have the cover, you take the record out and you put it on, and you have the liner notes, and you can kind of follow along, and you look at the art, and I got into it over lockdown because just sitting down and listening to a whole album, we don't really do that anymore. I mean, all these like the Spotifys and the titles, and they've all kind of ruined that.
That experiential part, so 2 points on that. That experiential part, I think, is massive. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's like there's a pendulum, and we went straight from enjoy the convenience of having everything at your fingertips, but then when you've got everything at your fingertips, nothing seems as valuable, and so it's then swinging back to, I'd rather choose something but get deep into it rather than have a surface touch on a lot of different things.
I remember getting like CDs or tapes for Christmas when I was a kid, and then you'd go upstairs and like you'd listen to them and you would read all the liner notes and stuff, and it was a big thing. And then the feelings I have towards that music and those artists are greater than listening to a single on Spotify.
Ollie Sykes from Bring Me the Horizon was on an interview recently saying they're not going to do albums anymore because the shape of an album was to have X number of songs on a disc, and that's an old model now. And now in a streaming economy, if you create an album based on it needs to have this number of songs, some songs are going to suffer. So it makes a lot more financial sense to put the effort into fewer songs and just release them more often.
But there's the story of like you think about like the CD kind of goes straight through, but then you have all the B-sides of albums, and they maybe wouldn't have ever had the chance to be made or released if it wasn't for the A side,
Yeah. I want to jump on to Meta because time is absolutely flying. I want to talk on to Metaverse. My big question around Metaverse is that
what is it?
Online. It's my interpretation of what people are telling me Metaverse is that it's an online platform, usually avatar based, where you can move around and interact with other people. My question is, or my point is, that we've had that for years in the form of online games, massive multiplayer online games, likes of Skyrim, Grand Theft Auto, Roblox, even like Habbo Hotel and Penguin Chat or whatever that one was that was bought by Disney. That they've been in existence for decades. So where does an online game stop and a metaverse start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when I first started talking about the metaverse back in like 2016, 2017, I talked about it as an infinite digital landscape onto which we can create anything. And I still think that remains true today at its most basic sense. How you enter it, what the function is and stuff is secondary to that idea that this is a digital landscape that is infinite and we are the creators of it. Mm-hmm. So to me, there's also the pre-Mark Zuckerberg definition of metaverse and the post-Mark Zuckerberg. So, this what we actually have today is a multiverse. We don't have a metaverse by the true definition. A metaverse by a true definition has this interoperability. It is the future of the internet where you can move from one metaverse to the other as simply as you move from one website to another while maintaining your identity, your wallet, your avatars, your digital assets, all those kind of things. And that's
what they call interoperability, right?
Yes, yeah. And that is still quite a ways away, really, because that takes collaboration and cooperation and data sharing. And you have some companies that are just intent on ruling this space as opposed to partnering to make it what it could be. So, for instance, like there's kind of, two of the leaders, you could say, there's the metaverse, the meta approach, Facebook approach to it, which is they want to own it. So they missed out on Web 2, which is the mobile internet, that is owned by Apple and Google. And so back in like 2015, 2016, there were leaked emails from Zuckerberg saying, we need to create Web3 so we can own Web3. So that's one of the things I say in some of my talks is it's good to keep in mind that the original internet was created by technologists and academics and overseen by governments as a way to share information across geographic locations. Commerce, consumerism was definitely an afterthought, whereas Web3 is being developed by all these big tech companies with consumerism and commerce at its core. And when I say that, what I'm really talking about is your data and your attention, because that's how they make their money. And that is the center of why they are moving us forward into this new
it would
web.
seem that the utopia of a metaverse is, as you were saying, being able to pick up your stuff. Your stuff is accessible no matter which gate you go through to access it. So you could have different metaverses, but your assets are stored in one central place, and you can pick up and go.
It's like when you go from one website to another, and your credit card details are there, and it knows your birth date, and you don't,
and you don't need to switch browser to go from one website to another one.
Exactly.
But companies like Meta or Facebook and the like, it doesn't seem like it's particularly in their interest to have open interoperability. They like to create the walled garden. You need to be on Facebook because all your friends are on Facebook, and you can't access, back in the day, you couldn't access that. You couldn't access the conversation if you weren't a member. And likewise, they're going to surely try and do that with a metaverse. They're not going to suddenly open it all up, because then they wouldn't make any money from that. So you have this situation where the big players, it's like they're fighting to become the foundation of what everything is built on metaverses. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. I mean, to me, kind of the moral code in Metaverse, the closest that we have is Tim Sweeney of Epic Games. And they, to me, are like the hope of what it can be. And this idea that they empower developers, empower the people, because the thing is that we do have power, because we are the ones that they need us there. It all fails if we don't participate. So by kind of servicing these developers and the people, and if we want that interoperability and that convenience, then I think, we do have we should have a bit of a stake and a voice. And that comes from the designing and development end of it. Because, I mean, we can all build our own metaverse. I can have mine. I can be Amelia at Amelia. There's no more like .coms or .orgs or whatever. I mean, in the metaverse, those things all become up for grabs. I had a fascinating talk with somebody the other day. I mean, I didn't even realize that the .com at the end of a website is like an advertisement for another company or a .org. And so, moving into Web3, it's all getting done differently. So, like I said, I could be .amelia if I want, and not have to, and then be fully branded, and not have to kind of share that with another company. I don't know.
Yeah, I think when it was created, it made sense because the scope was so much smaller. You had .coms for companies,
and there's a cap on it too.
There's a finite amount of words that you can put in there that still make sense, and so there's a huge list. They're called top-level domains, TLDs. .com.co.uk. I had one. I've just retired recently, which was .email, and people were like, .email? Are you serious? Like, yeah, it will work. Send me it, please.
Yeah.
But there's loads, and you have country-specific ones. What is the fundamental use of a metaverse? Do people want to be cartoon characters? And from the other side, if those that are pushing for photorealism, isn't it just like an imitation? Shouldn't we just come out and meet in person?
Yeah. No. Yes and no. I do think that there is a place for a metaverse. I do think that there are benefits and really amazing creative possibilities to be had there. I think right now, if brands are informed and being honest with themselves, they need to recognize the audience that is there. So the audience is Gen Z. So it's a younger audience, under 25s, and even younger than that. And then gamers and some music fans and some event fans are going to start to get into it as well. And that's still a relatively small market. But if those are not your customers, then there's an argument to be made about maybe this is not the right time or place to put yourself out there and to get in there.
You can be too early to a market.
Exactly.
Right, as well as too late.
And so when I talk about that infinite digital white space that overlays on top, overlays on top of the world. So, I think there's a mistake to be had, or, oftentimes people think of just the metaverse is like going into VR glasses and it's like Ready Player One, the movie, and that kind of thing. But there is going to be, the world is being mapped. So our outdoors environment, our indoor environments, the facades of buildings, the interiors of buildings are all going to have digital overlays. And we're going to be able to design these, to interact with these, to update these, create these. And there's going to be a whole industry that emerges around this opportunity. So there's designing these spaces, there's selling the space, there's renting the space, leasing the space, and then there's regulating the space and policing the space. So if you think about outside your office building, you can update it for seasons, you can have it reflect the latest projects that you're working on, you can make it interactive.
Are you still talking about the world of VR, or have we moved into AR territory?
Yeah, so I'm in AR, MR territory, yeah, for sure. And so while today you might get a bad review on Yelp or Glassdoor or something, there's nothing really stopping anyone from taking a billboard out in front of your office building and say, how shitty you treated them or so, that kind of thing. So that kind of digital graffiti will have to be regulated and policed and looked at. And there, like I said, there's a whole new economy that's going to emerge around this. So it's not just putting on a headset, being isolated alone in your bedroom. It's also how we interact in the world with other people, with strangers, with friends, with family. This idea of glocal, so bringing together, doing global experiences on a local level where you are with your community sharing an experience that maybe then is happening in other places around the world at the same time is really exciting.
There needs to be some kind of editorializing. This is a little bit of a problem with ethics around the internet. I think for a long time, websites tried to be, especially social media sites, they tried to be analogous to highways, where it's not the M4's fault if you go down at 120 miles an hour. And for a long time, they were able to do that, but then they've had to step in and it starts off by removing the most egregious offences, but then as soon as you edit anything, you're in editorializing, and then it's someone's job to decide what is and isn't appropriate. And
well, that brings up the bigger issue is that when we go into this Web3, and the government, some governments are looking at it, some governments are looking at it differently. So either we're sort of looking at the Facebooks and the Epic Games and the Roblox, deciding what flies in these spaces and what doesn't, and how people can be punished or not punished, or taxed or not taxed. It's the same kind of thing we have on Twitter and social media today. Who decides what is right and wrong in society? I mean, and as a world, we don't have a shared value system.
No, we're quite fortunate being in the West, in that this is where most of this technology was created and pioneered, or at least put out there. So the ethics system that's applied to it is, generally speaking, acceptable to us. But if it was created in a country that has more conservative values, for example, around women and modesty, if it's a country that believes skin should be covered up, you wouldn't be allowed to have bikini photos on Instagram, for example. And then those boundaries seem to get more and more contentious. And so when you shift into a metaverse with the idea that joins people globally, what ethics system do you apply to that, and what legal system do you apply to that?
Well, I mean, for instance, China's working on developing their own metaverse and with government oversight. And, they very much have bought into,
they have their own
recognition,
internet already.
All this, yeah, exactly. All this kind of stuff, Google's not there, all these kind of things. And it will be less focused on user-generated content, more focused on experience and commerce. And but the one thing that is an advantage to them is because they have that coming from a higher level down, they have the opportunity to move faster than everyone else. South Korea is also, government is taking an active look at this.
When you started talking about overlay, so there's one last little point on VR is that if you're trying to recreate three-dimensional spaces in virtual reality, you naturally hit a point where there's only a finite number of avatars that can fit into a space. And you're trying to, without you having to, what's called sharding, where two people can see exactly the same space, but you don't see each other because you can only fit so many people into a room.
Well, but that will change as networking changes, as cloud happens, as 6G happens, as quantum happens, right?
But I don't know whether it can change because your avatar will still have to take an amount of virtual space, three-dimensional virtual space, if you're in a room. But I think you mentioned the word overlay, which I think is where I personally see metaverses going. I haven't seen enough evidence from the VR side to say that people are going to shift. Maybe Gen Z who are already hooked into that and it's more natural of a progression for them. But I see the potential being much more in AR. It's that the reason that we haven't seen more of it is because we don't have AR glasses right now, but they are on the way. And when they do, that opens up the potential to have a whole layer, and going back to people being very visual, you could have a whole augmented layer on top of our present reality. And that could be, you could buy some new trainers and you've bought them with the flames overlay. And so people wearing glasses walking around can see your flaming kicks and go, hey, they're really cool. And then say you buy some gig tickets, and that comes with probably an NFT of an overlay of those same, if they've teamed up with Nike or something. You've got some band overlay, and I'm talking like motion graphics, things that fly off your shoes as you're walking by that are based around the artist or band that you've bought tickets for. That's where I can see a potential making. We're so our attention spans are a lot shorter now, as evidenced by my going, what was I talking about? And we need constant little bits of interaction, little bits of endorphin hits, something new, where we're not very good at sitting by ourselves anymore. And so I think a digital overlay, a visual, more stimulating world that applies visual graphics to static sources, I think that would probably take off. What do you think?
For sure. And the ability to turn it on and off, to interact with it when you want, to have it almost on a volume so you can turn it up to have this massive, everything coming at you, or just turn it right down so you just get the basic notifications. Yeah, I think there's a whole spectrum there that's coming.
There'd have to be a greater level of user power, because otherwise it would just be filled, because no one would use it if it was filled with ads. You can kind of get away with it on websites because they blend into the background, or you use an ad blocker or something. But then also the interesting thing about that though is it shifts it from the software companies, the social media companies. If you're having a metaverse that's a layer on top of reality in AR, the power then becomes with the hardware manufacturers, probably the Apples, the Samsungs, the key OEMs on that. Do you think? So you're then entering into their ecosystem, and it's an ecosystem that can thrive on being interoperable.
Yeah.
So I think that's a better way forward. It's
That's
relying
a
a
good
lot on hope. I don't know how much that will come. Is there any predictions that you've got? Because I think you've tried Google Glasses in the past, and you've worn all sorts of different AR things.
I tried the original Google Glass back in 2013. That was like, but yeah, Google Glass has a place right now. I mean, it's being used in industries and like industrial uses in manufacturing, and there's definitely a place for all these technologies. This idea that every generation, everyone's just going to kind of stop what we're doing today and start doing something differently, is wrong. You know, like, I'm not a gamer, and I don't think I'll ever be a gamer. So, you know, like, for me, you know, there has to be a significant incentive for me to participate in some of, you know, to go into these spaces and to have some of these experiences. And, you know, and that might be going to a concert, that might be getting some kind of exclusive entry into something, or being able to communicate with a specific group of people who share an interest, or you mentioned that, like, people wouldn't be in a world if it was just ads all the time, but it depends how you incentivize them. So, like, you know, if we have to look at ads all the time, but that means that we get discounts on everything, or our insurance premiums go down, or we get longer vacation time from work, or, you know, I think there's a big kind of power shift. Okay, I guess this is
someone's got to pay for it, haven't they?
Yeah.
The moment the internet is free to the user because it's paid for by ads.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's going to be a big shift between the relationship between businesses and consumers and customers, in that consumers and customers are going to become a lot more important in driving the direction of companies and the products that they offer and the services that they use and their environment inside the metaverse. Because, you know, they're going to have these kind of influencers to get other people into these spaces and designing them and developing them. So I see that relationship shifting into a more active kind of approach, and incentivization is a huge part of that. And that was like what we were talking about with the workplace yesterday. You know, they're talking about taking all this data from people, and yes, you get more personalization, but unless it's tangible, like, if you give us your data, we're going to pay you for your data, or we're going to give you more holiday time, or your insurance is coming down. All these kind of things become...
Yeah, people are they're willing to trade a lot as long as they get something from it. When you're sat at a desk, you have a phone next to it, and it's listening to you. It has to listen to you, just in case you utter those magic words of, "Hey Google," or "Hey Siri." But it is listening to you. It has to listen to you to hear it. So everybody's carrying around this listening device, but we trade that off for convenience. So if the biggest shifts, I think, are going to be around who's paying for it and community. That seems to be, throughout this conversation, the underlying theme. When we started off talking about NFTs, the most successful ones are ones that are built around community. The Bored Ape Yacht Club is more about community and wanting to be part of a tribe with like-minded individuals, and they'll group together. The one you're talking about is about being part of a membership with like-minded people, and then metaverses and AR is about sharing space and sharing commonalities with people.
Yeah, experiences.
Fantastic. Okay, well, this could go on for another hour, but I think we better wrap it up now. So, Amelia, thank you so much, and I look forward to maybe doing a part 2 in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Graham.
Awesome, thanks.